March 14th, 1865. The afternoon mist hung heavy over Fairview Plantation in South Carolina. From her second-story window, Margaret Thornton watched, heart pounding, as cavalry emerged from the humid vale, blue uniforms. But these were not the men she had been taught to fear, nor were they the subservient figures she had known. Her diary, discovered decades later, would capture the shock of that moment. "We have never seen men like these. They are something entirely new under this southern sun." This was the collision of two irreconcilable worlds, multiplied thousands of times across the dying Confederacy. A world built on an absolute hierarchy, now confronted by an unforeseen force that threatened to unravel its very foundations. Who were these soldiers? And what did their appearance truly signify for a society on the brink of collapse? Where are you watching us from today? Let us know in the comments below. From Hidden Files, we delve into the untold impact of an army unlike any other. The afternoon of March 14th, 1865, draped itself over Fairview Plantation in South Carolina with a peculiar, almost suffocating stillness. A heavy, humid mist, characteristic of the coastal lowcountry, had rolled in from the nearby rivers and swamps, enshrouding the vast cotton fields. It blurred the distant line of pines and oaks that bordered the property, creating an atmosphere both serene and deeply unnerving. Within the stately colonial mansion, a structure that had stood for generations as a testament to prosperity and order, Margaret Thornton stood vigil. At 42 years of age, she bore the burden of Fairview, a substantial estate with 87 enslaved individuals, now a precarious outpost in a war rapidly drawing to its desperate conclusion. She was a widow, her husband, a Confederate colonel, having fallen at Gettysburg, leaving her to navigate this collapsing world alone. From the drawing room window on the second floor, Margaret listened, her senses heightened by months of anxiety. Her fingers, usually accustomed to the delicate work of embroidery or the crisp feel of ledgers, now gripped the thick lace curtains, their intricate patterns doing little to obscure the encroaching reality. The sound, initially an almost imperceptible thrum against the ground, grew with each passing minute, a distant rhythmic thud that vibrated through the very foundations of the house. It was the unmistakable cadence of horses in formation, growing louder, more insistent, a martial heartbeat against the quiet breath of the land. Cavalry. Margaret had anticipated this moment for weeks, perhaps even months, ever since news of General William Tecumseh Sherman's brutal march to the sea had spread like a contagion through the remaining Confederate territories. His subsequent push through the Carolinas had been an inexorable advance, each dispatch carrying fresh waves of fear and a creeping sense of inevitability. She had steeled herself, preparing for the sight of Union troops, envisioning the stern, professional soldiers of the Army of the Potomac. Her education, steeped in the traditions of the Old South, had taught her to expect a certain decorum, even from enemies. She believed in the codes of military engagement, even if they were to be wielded against her. But as the vanguard of the column materialized from the milky haze that shrouded the main drive, her practiced composure began to fracture. Dark, indistinct silhouettes sharpened into precise forms, Federal blue uniforms. The sight itself was expected, yet as the lead riders drew closer, Margaret's breath hitched. Her gaze, sharpened by an almost primal apprehension, registered details that shattered her preconceived notions of the invading force. Many of the soldiers, distinct even from her vantage point high above, were black. Fairview had been her entire world, a microcosm of the hierarchical society of the Deep South. For decades, her life had revolved around its intricate social structure. She had managed the lives of men, women, and children she considered her property, individuals whose roles and positions were immutably fixed within her societal framework. The men now riding across her manicured lawns and past her fields, however, bore no resemblance to the figures of her experience. These were not the field hands who toiled under the oppressive Carolina sun, nor the house servants who moved with quiet deference within these very walls. These were soldiers. Her eyes followed a particular unit as it approached the circular turnaround before the mansion's imposing entrance. The men sat upright in their saddles, their backs ramrod straight, their shoulders squared. Their movements were precise, synchronized, a testament to rigorous drill and disciplined training. Springfield Model 1861 rifles, standard issue for Union infantry, were slung across their shoulders or held steady, their polished wood and cold steel glinting faintly in the diffused light, catching the muted glow of the mist. Their expressions, visible even at a distance, were not those of chaotic fury or triumphant celebration, but rather a solemn, almost austere determination. This was not a rabble. It was a professional military force, operating with an undeniable quiet authority. The sight represented more than just a military occupation. It was a profound ideological assault on the very fabric of her existence. Margaret's world, built upon the absolute certainty of racial hierarchy and the inherent subservience of black people, now witnessed black men embodying the very epitome of armed federal authority. The concept was not merely alien. It was an inversion of every fundamental truth she had been taught to believe. The traditional power dynamics, the unspoken and unbroken rules that had governed every interaction between black and white in her society, were not merely being challenged. They were being systematically dismantled before her eyes, rendered obsolete by the sheer, undeniable fact of their presence. The cognitive dissonance was acute, a sickening lurch in her understanding of reality. These were men who, by the laws of her land, were meant to be chattel, yet they marched with the confident stride of conquerors. The column continued its passage, a steady, deliberate river of blue uniforms and gleaming steel flowing past the plantation's entrance. Unit after unit, a seemingly endless procession that stretched back into the lingering mist, suggesting a force of considerable size. Margaret remained fixed at the window, observing in a state of suspended disbelief, her mind struggling to process the implications. The clinking of harness, the creak of leather, the muffled commands from the white officers at the head of regiments, all blended into a chilling symphony of military order. The sheer discipline displayed by these black soldiers, the crispness of their formations, their evident military competence, defied every racist caricature, every paternalistic assumption that had underpinned her society's justification for slavery. They were not only present, but they were competent. They were formidable. As the last ranks of cavalry faded into the thick mist, the rhythmic rumble slowly receded, leaving behind an unsettling, almost deafening quiet. The air, thick with humidity, now carried an unspoken truth, an indelible mark of transformation. The immediate threat of direct confrontation had passed for the moment, but the psychological impact lingered, a heavy, unshakable presence within the mansion's walls. Margaret's hands slowly unclenched from the lace, leaving faint, temporary impressions in the delicate fabric. Her world, once defined by immutable certainties, had just been irrevocably altered. The fear that had gripped her had now mingled with a deep, unsettling perplexity, a chilling realization that the old order was not merely threatened, but had perhaps already begun to crumble. Later that evening, in the stark solitude of her study, the silence of the mansion was profound, broken only by the crackle of a dying fire in the hearth. Margaret Thornton sat at her mahogany desk, her hand reaching for her leather-bound journal, a silent confidant through the long, arduous years of war. The words she inscribed that night, born from the crucible of that afternoon's shocking revelation, would resonate through history as a testament to the seismic shift occurring across the South. Her pen scratched across the aged page, committing to paper a truth she had never imagined possible, a truth that defied every lesson, every belief, every assumption she had ever held. We have never seen men like these. They are not the subservient slaves we knew, nor the chivalrous soldiers we feared. They are something entirely new under this southern sun. This entry, a raw documentation of profound cultural and military shock, marked not just the end of a singular day, but the dawning of an order Margaret Thornton, and indeed the entire Confederacy, had never conceived. It was a chilling glimpse into a future that was, for her, unimaginable, and yet undeniably present. The shock that Margaret Thornton experienced on that humid March afternoon in 1865 was not a sudden, isolated phenomenon. It was the culmination of a revolutionary transformation initiated years earlier, a radical shift in policy and perspective that began to dismantle the very foundations of the Southern world. To understand the sight of armed black soldiers marching across Fairview Plantation, one must return to the years 1862 and 1863, a period when the Union's war aims expanded dramatically, irrevocably altering the course of the American Civil War. For the initial 18 months of the conflict, President Abraham Lincoln's primary objective remained the preservation of the Union, often reiterating that the war was not fought to abolish slavery. However, as the war dragged on, consuming lives and resources at an unprecedented rate, the strategic calculus began to change. Slavery, the bedrock of the Confederate economy and its ability to sustain a war effort, became an increasingly undeniable military target. Fugitive slaves, termed contraband by Union General Benjamin Butler as early as 1861, were already streaming into Union lines, providing valuable intelligence and labor, and inadvertently forcing the issue of their status. The turning point arrived with the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation in September 1862, following the Union victory at Antietam. This decree, made effective on January 1, 1863, declared all enslaved people in Confederate states to be free. Crucially, beyond its immediate liberatory impact, the proclamation included a provision that laid the groundwork for an entirely new military force. It explicitly authorized the enlistment of black men into the Union Army. Lincoln, a pragmatist as much as an idealist, understood that emancipation could simultaneously strike a crippling blow against the Confederacy's labor force and bolster the Union's dwindling manpower reserves. This was not merely a moral declaration. It was a calculated act of war, designed to harness the human potential previously suppressed by the Confederate system. The implementation of this revolutionary policy required a systematic approach. By May 1863, recognizing the immense potential and logistical challenges of recruiting and organizing tens of thousands of black soldiers, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton established the Bureau of Colored Troops within the War Department. This bureau standardized the recruitment, equipping, and training of what would formally become the United States Colored Troops, USCT. It designated white officers to command these regiments, often requiring them to pass rigorous examinations to ensure their commitment and competence, though the ranks themselves were filled by black enlisted men. General Lorenzo Thomas, the Adjutant General of the Army, was instrumental in spearheading mass recruitment efforts, particularly in the Mississippi Valley, traveling extensively to rally support and organize the burgeoning regiments. The creation of the USCT was a logistical undertaking of immense scale, transforming the Union Army into a truly multiracial force. Central to this transformation was the powerful, articulate voice of Frederick Douglass, a formerly enslaved man who had become the nation's foremost abolitionist orator, writer, and statesman. Douglass understood the profound implications of black military service. He toured the North relentlessly, delivering impassioned speeches that argued eloquently for the right of black men to fight for their freedom and the freedom of their brethren. He saw military service not just as a means to win the war, but as the surest path to full citizenship and equality. Once let the black man get upon his person the brass letters, USE, let him get an eagle on his button, and a musket on his shoulder, and bullets in his pocket. There is no power on earth that can deny that he has earned the right to citizenship, Douglass declared, his words resonating with thousands. His advocacy was not merely rhetorical, it was deeply personal. Both of his sons, Lewis Douglass, age 23, and Charles Douglass, 19, enlisted in the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment, a powerful testament to their father's convictions and their own commitment to the cause. Lewis, a sergeant, would later distinguish himself with his courage. The 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment, formed in the spring of 1863, quickly became the most famous of the early USCT units. Its command was given to Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, a 25-year-old scion of a prominent Boston abolitionist family. Shaw, an idealist and committed advocate for racial equality, accepted the command with a profound sense of responsibility, understanding the immense symbolic weight placed upon his regiment. Its success or failure would undoubtedly shape public opinion regarding the capabilities of black soldiers. The regiment attracted free black men from across the North, eager to prove their valor and secure their liberty. Among them were Douglas's sons, bringing a heightened profile to the unit. The 54th underwent rigorous training, transforming civilians into disciplined soldiers, all under the intense scrutiny of a nation divided by prejudice and hope. Concurrently, in the occupied territories of the South, particularly in the Sea Islands of South Carolina, other groundbreaking units were forming. The 1st South Carolina Volunteers, established in late 1862, holds the distinction of being among the very first officially recognized black regiments in the Union Army. Its ranks were filled primarily by formerly enslaved individuals from the very soil they were fighting to liberate. This unit was commanded by Colonel Thomas Wentworth Higginson, a 41-year-old Unitarian minister and fervent abolitionist who documented his experiences with profound insight. Higginson meticulously recorded the intelligence, resilience, and military aptitude of his men, consistently challenging prevailing racist assumptions. Within these pioneering units, extraordinary individuals emerged whose contributions extended beyond the battlefield. Susie King Taylor, then a 16-year-old formerly enslaved woman, served with the 1st South Carolina Volunteers as a laundress, nurse, and, crucially, a teacher. Having secretly learned to read and write during her enslavement, she provided vital literacy skills to the soldiers, many of whom had been forbidden education under the Confederacy. Her quiet dedication represented the profound thirst for knowledge and self-improvement that permeated the ranks of the USCT. Another towering figure was Harriet Tubman, approximately 43 years old in 1863, whose legendary work on the Underground Railroad seamlessly transitioned into service as a scout, spy, and nurse for the Union Army. She famously led the Combahee River Raid in 1863, a successful operation that liberated hundreds of enslaved people and disrupted Confederate supply lines, demonstrating the diverse and critical roles black individuals played in the Union war effort. This period, from 1862 to 1863, was an extraordinary fusion of idealism and stark reality. The formation of the USCT represented a profound hope for racial justice and a radical redefinition of American citizenship. Yet, it unfolded against a pervasive backdrop of intense skepticism and deep-seated prejudice, even within the Union ranks. Many white Union soldiers and officers, while accepting the necessity of black troops, harbored racist sentiments. They questioned the fighting ability of black men and often subjected them to unequal pay and discriminatory treatment. On the Confederate side, the reaction was one of outrage and explicit denial. Confederate President Jefferson Davis declared that black soldiers and their white officers would not be treated as prisoners of war, often threatening execution or re-enslavement, a policy that instilled a grim determination within the USCT to never be captured. The journey from the Emancipation Proclamation to the active deployment of USCT regiments was fraught with political battles, logistical hurdles, and societal resistance. Yet the momentum was undeniable. By the time the weary, disciplined soldiers marched past Margaret Thornton's window in 1865, they were not just a military force, they were the living embodiment of a revolution, a testament to the courage of men who had seized the opportunity to fight for their freedom and to forge a new future for a nation grappling with its own moral contradictions. The seed of this revolution, planted by Lincoln's decree and nurtured by the unwavering efforts of abolitionists and the profound bravery of the black men who enlisted, had finally blossomed into an undeniable, transformative power. The revolutionary policies of 1862 and 1863, which allowed black men to enlist in the Union Army, faced widespread skepticism. Many, even within the Union, doubted the courage and discipline of African American soldiers, clinging to deeply ingrained racial prejudices. Yet, the true test of this burgeoning force would not be found in training camps, but in the crucible of combat. It was on the battlefields of 1863 and 1864 that the United States Colored Troops, USCT, would unequivocally prove their martial prowess, overturning stereotypes and establishing an indelible legacy of honor and sacrifice. One of the most defining moments for the USCT occurred on July 18, 1863, at Fort Wagner, South Carolina. Charleston, the symbolic heart of the Confederacy, was heavily fortified, its harbor protected by a series of formidable defenses, including Fort Wagner on Morris Island. The Union strategy called for an amphibious assault to seize the fort. The immense burden of leading this charge fell to the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment, a unit of black enlisted men commanded by the abolitionist Colonel Robert Gould Shaw. As dusk settled over the sandy beaches of Morris Island, the 54th Massachusetts formed up. Their approach to Fort Wagner was a narrow, treacherous stretch of beach exposed to Confederate artillery. At approximately 7:45 p.m., Colonel Shaw, at the head of his regiment, ordered the advance. He led his men personally, his voice cutting through the rising din of Union artillery, surging over the parapet. Moments later, he was struck by multiple bullets and fell, killed instantly, his body coming to rest among his fallen men. His death became a powerful symbol of shared sacrifice. Amidst the chaos, extraordinary heroism emerged. Sergeant William Harvey Kearny, a 24-year-old formerly enslaved man in Company C of the 54th, seized the regimental colors when the flag bearer was shot down. Though severely wounded, he pressed on, planting the flag atop the parapet. Despite his injuries, he held the flag high, inspiring his comrades. When the retreat was ordered, Kearny, against immense odds, carried the tattered flag back to Union lines, reportedly declaring, "Boys, I only did my duty. The old flag never touched the ground." For his extraordinary valor, Sergeant Kearny became the first African American to be awarded the Medal of Honor. Other members of the 54th Massachusetts also displayed immense courage. Lewis Douglas, the 23-year-old son of Frederick Douglass, served as a sergeant, maintaining his position and directing his men. Sergeant Robert John Simmons, an ex-fugitive slave, fought bravely, demonstrating fierce determination. Private James Henry Gooding, a 27-year-old sailor, also participated in the assault. Gooding had previously gained recognition for a powerful letter to President Lincoln, eloquently arguing against the discriminatory pay policy that saw black soldiers earning less than their white counterparts. His unwavering participation at Fort Wagner, despite the insult of unequal pay, highlighted the deep sense of duty felt by the USCT. The assault on Fort Wagner was a tactical defeat for the Union, resulting in heavy casualties for the 54th Massachusetts, which suffered nearly 50% losses. However, it was a profound moral and symbolic victory. The unwavering courage and discipline displayed by the black soldiers, witnessed by both Union and Confederate forces, shattered many prevailing racist assumptions about their fighting ability. News of their valor spread rapidly, silencing skeptics and galvanizing support for the USCT. Concurrent with the Fort Wagner assault, another critical engagement in the Western Theater showcased the bravery of black troops. In May and June of 1863, the Union Army besieged Port Hudson, Louisiana, a Confederate stronghold. During an assault on May 27th, 2 regiments, including the 1st Louisiana Native Guards, charged heavily fortified positions. Captain André Caillou, a 38-year-old free man of color from New Orleans and a respected leader, led his men with exceptional gallantry. He was among the first to reach the enemy's breastworks, urging his troops forward. Tragically, Captain Caillou was struck down by a Confederate shell, becoming one of the earliest black officers to die in combat during the Civil War. His death, alongside hundreds of his comrades, served as another powerful testament to the fighting spirit of black soldiers. As the war progressed into its later stages, the USCT continued to prove their mettle. In September 1864, during the Petersburg-Richmond campaign, black troops played a crucial role in the Battle of Chaffin's Farm, a brutal engagement to breach Confederate defenses. The 4th United States Colored Troops, under intense fire, spearheaded a desperate charge. Sergeant Major Christian Fleetwood, then 25 years old, distinguished himself with extraordinary bravery. When both the national colors and the regimental flag fell due to casualties, Fleetwood without hesitation retrieved both banners. Despite devastating enemy fire, he rallied his men and continued to push forward. For his exceptional actions, Fleetwood was later awarded the Medal of Honor. Accounts from white officers serving with the USCT consistently corroborated the valor and discipline of their black troops. Captain Luis Fenolosa Emilio, a 19-year-old white officer in the 54th Massachusetts, and later the regimental historian, meticulously documented his men's performance. His post-war writings provided invaluable first-hand evidence, directly contradicting racial prejudices. "No braver men were ever seen in battle than they," Emilio wrote, echoing the sentiments of many other white officers who witnessed the USCT in action. These officers, often starting with their own biases, became staunch advocates for their black soldiers after witnessing their unwavering courage. These baptisms of fire at Fort Wagner, Port Hudson, Chaffin's Farm, and countless other engagements served a singular purpose. They were pivotal moments where the United States colored troops, through their courage, discipline, and willingness to sacrifice, dismantled generations of racist stereotypes. They proved unequivocally that black men were capable, honorable, and formidable soldiers, equal in courage and commitment to any man in uniform. This transformation in perception, earned through blood and sacrifice on the battlefield, laid the moral and practical groundwork for their continued vital role in the final, desperate months of the Civil War, fundamentally reshaping the future of American society. The disciplined march of the United States colored troops past Fairview Plantation on March 14, 1865, as witnessed by Margaret Thornton, was not an isolated incident, but a singular echo in a chorus of change sweeping across the Confederacy. The sight of armed black men in federal uniforms, carrying the authority of the Union, had been building for months, a tide of liberation driven by General William Tecumseh Sherman's campaigns that irrevocably altered the landscape of the South. From November 1864, when Sherman departed Atlanta for Savannah, through his relentless advance across the Carolinas in the spring of 1865, his strategy of total war systematically exposed the fundamental contradictions of Confederate society. Among his 62,000 troops, approximately 7,000 were soldiers of the USCT, men who, only a few years prior, might have been counted as property on the very plantations they now traversed as armed liberators. For Margaret Thornton, the profound sense of disorientation noted in her diary, "We have never seen men like these. They are not the subservient slaves we knew, nor the chivalrous soldiers we feared. They are something entirely new under this Southern sun," resonated deeply with the experiences of other Southern women whose world was collapsing around them. Across Georgia, South Carolina, and Louisiana, diarists recorded their raw reactions to this unprecedented confrontation. Sarah Morgan, a 23-year-old daughter of a plantation owner in Louisiana, found herself confronting Union occupation as early as April 1863, an occupation that included black regiments. Her entries, filled with a mix of fear and indignation, captured the essence of the cultural shock. To see men who looked like our own servants, now dressed in federal authority, giving orders we must obey. It is as if the world had turned upside down, she wrote. Her words reflected a disbelief that extended beyond mere military defeat. It was a fundamental shattering of the social order she had always known. Similarly, Eliza Frances Andrews, a 24-year-old daughter of Judge Garnett Andrews of Georgia, recorded in her detailed diary of 1865 the bewildering swiftness of change. She witnessed firsthand how the institution of slavery, once considered immutable, dissolved with startling speed under the gaze of Union forces. And Kate Stone, a 24-year-old Louisiana plantation owner's daughter, chronicled her family's desperate flight as refugees, her journal filled with the pervasive fear of what black troops, now armed and empowered, might represent. These narratives collectively painted a picture of a society grappling with an existential crisis, forced to confront the dismantling of its deeply entrenched racial hierarchy. Sherman's campaigns were defined by a liberal foraging policy, which authorized Union troops to live off the land. This meant systematically taking provisions from civilian properties, food, livestock, horses, and anything else deemed necessary for the Army's sustenance. While this policy was broadly applied to all Union soldiers, the presence of USCT units added a layer of profound symbolism and anxiety for Southern plantation owners. They feared that black soldiers, many of them formerly enslaved, would exact violent revenge for years of oppression. However, historical records and the accounts of Union officers largely contradicted these fears. Discipline among the USCT, often under intense scrutiny, proved remarkably consistent and, in many documented cases, exemplary. Sergeant Major Christian Fleetwood, of the 4th United States Colored Troops, whose bravery at Chaffin's Farm had earned him the Medal of Honor, reflected on the conduct of his comrades during the final campaign. In April 1865, he wrote, "We marched through fields where some of our men worked in chains. We saw the whips still hanging on the walls of the overseers' cabins. Still we maintained discipline. We proved we are soldiers, not avengers." This restraint, maintained even in the face of immense provocation and personal memories of brutality, profoundly challenged the Southern expectation of uncontrolled racial violence. Reports from white officers commanding USCT units consistently highlighted the low desertion rates, approximately 9% compared to 15% among white troops, and the unwavering motivation of their black soldiers, further disproving racist assumptions. The presence of USCT units acted as a powerful, almost immediate catalyst for the dissolution of slavery on the plantations they encountered. It often required no formal decree, no violent confrontation, merely the undeniable sight of armed black men in federal uniforms. Plantations that had, for generations, maintained their enslaved labor force through a combination of violence, isolation, and psychological manipulation now witnessed that structure collapse in a matter of days, sometimes even hours. Eliza Francis Andrews vividly described this phenomenon. "Our servants, who yesterday still answered our calls, today walk alongside the Yankee soldiers as equals. There was no violence, no confrontation, simply an instant transformation, as if a spell had been broken." The silent exodus of enslaved people, walking away towards freedom with the protection of armed black soldiers, was a silent revolution. Perhaps even more perturbing for the plantation mistresses than the armed authority was the unexpected display of literacy and articulation by many of these black soldiers. The carefully cultivated stereotypes of the ignorant, unthinking Negro were shattered when soldiers, many of whom had learned to read in Union contraband camps or through Northern abolitionist mission societies, engaged with them. These interactions often occurred not with the expected deference, but with a formal courtesy that subtly, yet powerfully, asserted a fundamental equality. The ability of these men to speak clearly, to read orders, and to articulate their purpose fundamentally undermined the ideological underpinnings of slavery. The realization that these men, once dismissed as inherently inferior, possessed intelligence and agency, inflicted a deep and profound cultural shock. The cumulative effect of these encounters was an epistemic crisis for the Southern gentry. Their diaries and letters from this period reveal a collective struggle to reconcile the world they had believed in with the undeniable reality unfolding before them. If black men could execute complex military maneuvers, maintain discipline under extreme stress, and demonstrate literacy and articulation, then the entire ideological framework justifying their enslavement, the notion of inherent black inferiority, crumbled. This was not just a military defeat, it was a conceptual collapse. As the USCT marched deeper into the South, they carried not only rifles and requisition orders, but the tangible proof of a lie exposed. Their very existence in uniform, their conduct, and their undeniable impact on the institution of slavery presented an irrefutable argument against the system Margaret Thornton and her peers had fiercely defended. The war was ending, but the aftermath of these confrontations would reverberate for decades, defining the struggles of Reconstruction and the subsequent violent attempts to reassert a racial hierarchy that had, under the steady gaze of armed black soldiers, undeniably turned the world upside down. The vision Margaret Thornton experienced at Fairview Plantation was merely one moment in this sweeping tide of liberation, a personal testament to a societal upheaval that would forever redefine the American South. The disciplined march of the United States colored troops past Fairview Plantation on March 14, 1865, had been a moment of profound, unsettling realization for Margaret Thornton. Yet, this localized encounter was but a single ripple in a tidal wave of societal change that would fundamentally reshape the American South. The Civil War concluded within weeks of that afternoon, but the confrontation between the armed USCT and the established social order of the Confederacy left an indelible legacy, the consequences of which would reverberate for decades, defining the course of Reconstruction and beyond. For the approximately 179,000 black men who served in the Union Army and the 19,000 in its Navy, their military experience was nothing less than a transformative validation of their humanity and a powerful assertion of their right to citizenship. Frederick Douglass, the eminent abolitionist and orator whose own sons had served with distinction, articulated this truth with unparalleled clarity in 1863. Once let the black man get upon his person the brass letters, U.S. Let him get an eagle on his button and a musket on his shoulder and bullets in his pocket. There is no power on earth that can deny that he has earned the right to citizenship. By 1865, these words had moved from prophetic aspiration to undeniable fact, forged in the heat of battle and cemented by their critical contribution to Union victory. These men, once denied their very personhood, had earned their place as free citizens through the most traditionally recognized male and civic duty of the 19th century, effective military service. The symbolic culmination of this newfound status arrived with the fall of Richmond, the Confederate capital, in April 1865. Among the first Union units to march triumphantly into the city's smoldering streets was the 29th United States Colored Troops Infantry Regiment. As they paraded through the very heart of the defeated Confederacy, passing by the deserted Confederate White House and the ruins of government buildings, they were not merely conquerors, they were harbingers of a new social order. The sight of armed black soldiers occupying the symbol of white supremacy sent an unequivocal message. The old world was dead, and a new, albeit fragile and contested era, had begun. Their presence was a living, breathing testament to the profound shift in power dynamics, a visual representation of a revolution that had been waged not only with bullets, but with the very act of existing in uniform. For the white planter class, particularly the women who had been left to manage their estates during the war, this dramatic shift precipitated what has been termed an epistemic crisis. Their entire worldview, predicated on the inherent inferiority of black people and the divine sanction of slavery, was now confronted by irrefutable evidence to the contrary. The sight of disciplined, literate, and articulate black soldiers shattered the carefully constructed stereotypes that had justified their social and economic system. Mary Chesnut, a prominent South Carolina diarista and wife of a Confederate senator, whose perspective represented the elite Southern class, observed the collapse of the system with a mixture of despair and reluctant recognition. Her private entries from the period reveal a struggle to comprehend how the institution that defined their wealth and status could simply evaporate, and how the people they had subjugated could now stand as their equals, or even their superiors, in authority. Emma LeConte, an 18-year-old daughter of a professor in Columbia, South Carolina, witnessed the burning of her city and the subsequent arrival of Union troops in 1865. Her diaries detail the immense psychological shock of seeing black soldiers acting with a competence and dignity that contradicted every racial assumption she had been raised with. The observation of black soldiers carrying out orders, maintaining decorum, and demonstrating capabilities once exclusively attributed to white men forced a reluctant and often unadmitted recognition that the slave system was not only militarily unsustainable, but morally and practically indefensible. If black men could perform complex military duties, maintain discipline under extreme duress, and possess literacy and articulate thought, then the entire ideological scaffolding that rationalized slavery, the notion of innate racial inferiority, crumbled. This was more than a political defeat. It was a fundamental shattering of their reality. This forced recognition, however, rarely translated into public acceptance. Instead, the profound subversion of racial hierarchies witnessed during the war years, particularly through the actions of the USCT, planted the seeds for the violent counter-revolution that would follow. The immediate post-war period of Reconstruction saw federal efforts to establish civil rights for freed slaves, including the right to vote and hold office. Black veterans, having fought for their freedom, emerged as natural leaders within their communities, advocating for education, land, and political representation. This assertion of equality, however, was met with fierce, often brutal resistance from segments of the white Southern population desperate to restore the pre-war racial order. The rise of paramilitary terrorist groups like the Ku Klux Klan and other Redeemer organizations was a direct violent reaction to this perceived inversion of the social hierarchy. Their campaigns of intimidation, lynching, and voter suppression were specifically targeted at black veterans and their allies, precisely because the USCT had so effectively demonstrated black competence and courage. The particular terror directed at black men in uniform revealed the extent to which that martial demonstration of equality had threatened the very foundations of the old racial regime. These violent efforts, coupled with federal withdrawal from the South, ultimately led to the implementation of Jim Crow laws, which systematically stripped black Americans of their newly gained rights and re-established a legally sanctioned system of racial segregation and discrimination that would endure for nearly a century. This was an attempt to erase the truth so dramatically proven on the battlefield. When Margaret Thornton, in the twilight of that March evening in 1865, inscribed in her diary, "We have never seen men like these," she was unknowingly articulating the beginning of this complex, violent, and ultimately transformative legacy. She had witnessed not merely a military reversal, but a profound social revolution. The soldiers who marched across her plantation carried not only rifles and requisition orders, but the undeniable, living proof that the system she had defended was fundamentally based on lies. This truth, once demonstrated through the military discipline, courage in combat, and organizational competence of 179,000 black men in federal uniform, could never be entirely suppressed. Despite the violent systemic efforts to deny it for generations, the seed of equality planted by the USCT on the battlefields and plantations of the South remained, a stubborn, enduring testament to their indelible impact. In that moment in 1865, under the South Carolina sun, an ancient order died, and a new one, imperfect, bitterly contested, yet irrevocably different, was born through the unquestionable example of men who proved their equality in the most definitive way their era knew, through effective service in arms. The final days of the Confederacy brought not merely military defeat, but a profound, undeniable rupture in the very fabric of Southern society. As the war concluded, the image of armed black men in federal uniform, once an unthinkable absurdity, became a stark, inescapable reality across the ravaged landscape. Margaret Thornton's indelible observation, recorded in her journal, "We have never seen men like these," captured the essence of a world irrevocably transformed, a truth that permeated every corner of the dying South. The United States colored troops had not simply fought for the Union. They had waged a silent revolution, shattering the foundational falsehoods of a society built on human bondage. Their march, from the bloody sands of Fort Wagner and the desperate assaults at Port Hudson, to the triumphant entry into Richmond, proved that equality was not a distant ideal, but a tangible, earned right, carved out with musket and bayonet. The echoes of that seismic transformation resonate still, a persistent reminder that deeply entrenched beliefs, no matter how fiercely defended, can crumble when confronted by the undeniable truth of capability and courage. The legacy of these soldiers, forged in defiance and sacrifice, stands as a testament to the enduring power of human dignity and the relentless pursuit of freedom, even in the face of violent suppression. It reveals how moments of profound confrontation can fundamentally alter a nation's trajectory, forging a new reality, though the path to its full realization often stretches across generations. The courage of the USCT forced a nation to confront uncomfortable truths that reshaped the understanding of citizenship and human worth. What, in your view, is the most profound lesson gleaned from the actions of these soldiers, and how do their sacrifices continue to shape our understanding of justice and equality today? Share your reflections in the comments below. To explore another pivotal moment where established narratives were challenged and redefined, consider our examination of the often overlooked, hidden figures of the abolitionist movement. If this journey through a pivotal, unsettling chapter of history resonated with you, ensure you subscribe to Hidden Files and press the like button.